So I guess I'm live now. Hello, everyone. Many thanks that you attend this webinar provided by the RootCamp and K+S today. Our topic today is carbon farming. What are the challenges? And we want to provide a solution showcase, start an open discussion on this topic. We still face some minor technical difficulties with some participants. So it might be that we have a stop in between, a quick stop to restart it then and to enable other participants to enter. I would just like to give a very short introduction in what actually the webinar, why we did this webinar, what is the RootCamp. Let me share a couple of slides. So I hope you can see my picture right now, my screen. This webinar is provided by the DLG. DLG is the German agricultural community providing actually or organizing the Agritechnica, which will take place end of February next year. And today's participants of the carbon farming webinar, first of all, Rolf Härdter, who will join us later, as I said. He's the head of Agronomy and advisory at K+S. K+S is a fertilizer and raw materials company located in Kassel, and Rolf Härdter has a long history in agronomy, had been all over the world, and will provide his view of the challenges and the situation of the carbon farming at the moment. We are very happy to have Michal Slota here. He is in his main work, sales and business development at the also agricultural chemicals provider at Arkop. But maybe his second life or real life, he's a LinkedIn professional, so to say, with 17,000 followers and distributing always the best news on actually plant biotechnology. And will give us here a short overview of the current techniques of carbon farming. With Suvrajit Saha, we have the CTO of a startup company, SmartCloudFarming. He actually participated in our very first batch starting last year in December. And he's now conducting with the company and K+S a first pilot project. He will tell us about decentral monitoring and measuring of the carbon content of the soil. And last but not least, I'm very happy to have Michael Zernatinger here. He's a business representative of the Carbonauts. Carbonauts actually participate in the last batch of the SpinLab accelerator, which is our partner accelerator located in Leipzig. And he will give us the latest view on biochar and how that can contribute to the carbon farming. And now I want to give a very short overview of the RootCamp. Who are we? What are we doing? Our aim is actually to disrupt the agri-food value chain. We connect startup with industrial players of the agri-food value chain. We are located in Hannover, in Germany, also a place where the Agritechnica takes place. We were initiated by the SpinLab accelerator and by K+S. Another partner is KWS, where we had a webinar last year on ag biotechnology. As I said, the DLG is supporting us also and is the organization that organizes the Agritechnica. What do we offer as one of our products? An acceleration program for more or less early stage startups. We offer a program starting in the beginning of November. It's a 3 months or 12 weeks program. We have 6 intense weeks focusing on different topics. We provide a grant of 10,000 euro to conduct this phase. And as a good accelerator, we provide everything a startup needs to grow, to get ready for scaling, to go towards the investor readiness. And as a specialty, we have a program on the side where the startups are actually conducting workshops with the industrial partners and figuring out how they can apply their technology within the industrial processes, industrial environment of the industrial partner, so that they come up with a concept on how to pilot actually their technology. And this is then, if the concept is of high quality, then they get granted and can conduct with the integration project. So we call it, it's another 3 to 9 months. We provide another budget of up to 40,000 euros to actually enable the technology and test in real life. Our current focus for the batch that where the application period ends in the 17th of August, we look for ag-biotechnology solutions. We look for digital solutions like advisory, digital support, or new ways to set up a marketplace. We are also looking into robotics or weeding technologies, and as topic of today, we want to scout for new farming, carbon farming solutions, and address this field of CO2 reduction in the agriculture field. What is our next batch, or what does the timeline look like? So the application deadline is on the 17th of August. If you're interested, we also have a Ask Me Anything that we will provide on the 10th of August. And with the structured selection process, we will have the batch 2 start in November, beginning of November. So please make sure that you apply before the 17th of August. And now I want to just mention the last week's webinar again. We were looking for innovation in ag-biotechnology and seed applications together with our industrial partner KWS, a seed provider also from Germany. And if you missed it, the recording is available on the DLG platform as a video. And now I need to check if Rolf already was able to join. Chantal, how does it look?
Just about setting a bit the scene of what's behind and how do we deal with the challenges involved in this business. Drivers for carbon farming are actually the urgency of climate change, the global surge in interest on regenerative agricultural practices, and of course also the need for new income streams. When we look at the targets, saving the globe and staying below 1.5 degrees in global warming, tremendous efforts have to be paid in reducing carbon dioxide in the air. But beyond that, we see here in the blue areas, this is not sufficient in order to achieve this target. So we need negative emissions, and these negative emissions are actually what we call carbon farming. It can be the oceans, but these are natural systems, and we are today concentrating on farming basically. When we look at farming, it is potential to reduce and to absorb CO2, but currently agriculture is also a contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, as we see here. 20% of the greenhouses are actually coming from agriculture. And so the subject, of course, is played high today, and in particular also by the European community, which wants to become CO2 neutral by 2050 latest. We see that there are programs made for it, and looking at the new Green Deal of agriculture for the agricultural policy, we see, unfortunately, a lot of items here, and tackling climate change is only one of them. And looking deeper into the green deals by the CAP until 2030, we find a lot of reduction of actions, etc., reducing pesticides by 50%, reducing excess of nutrients, reducing nutrient losses, of course, all very positive aspects related to environment. But if we look at climate change relevant targets, we don't really find them here. And this is also a source of criticism by the European Court of Auditors. They looked actually at the CAP measures in the last decade, where 100 billion of euros were spent for climate change, and critical review by them has shown that greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture have basically not decreased since 2010. Most measures have a low climate mitigation potential. And that contributes, of course, that greenhouse emissions rather inclined than declined. Reduction of the use of fertilizers such as organic and cultivating granular legumes practices have an unclear impact on greenhouse gas emissions. More effective measures such as precision farming, matching fertilizer applications to crop needs received rather low funding in this program. And what we see is also that afforestation, agroforestry, and the conversion of arable land to grassland has not increased compared to 2007-2030 period. And in conclusion, we may even say that CAP measures on climate change have only been very marginal. So let's hope for the new period until 2030, where 5 key issues have been identified, or areas have been identified. It's the peatland restoration, the rewetting of peatlands, agroforestry, maintaining and enhancing soil organic carbon on mineral soils, grassland, livestock farm, carbon audits. The general practices to sequester carbon in soils is actually to grow cover crops, to manage crop residues, lay land rotation compared with arable or zero-till practices, agroforestry intercropping, removing land from cropping, etc. We have started a cooperation with CO2 Land, and they actually looked at rather simple changes. Improved crop rotation, incorporation of straw already may lead to a sequestration of carbon in the soil. So the scheme that was run from low to high here was a simple improved crop rotation up to a combination of farmyard manure, clover grass, etc., and growing miscanthus in order to increase the carbon that is then brought into the soil in order to permanently be stored there. And evaluating these schemes and these scenarios, we looked at the 2 input levels that were shown in the previous slide, and they calculated how much carbon would be sequestered if only 10% of the arable land would overtake the measures that were listed in the previous slides. And we can see that the sequestration might be quite potential. If 100% of the arable land would overtake in Germany the higher level of carbon farming, 43 million of tons of CO2 per hectare would be sequestered then. So it's a huge potential. And this is also when we look at the global dimension. There was a publication of SOMA, and they looked and calculated how much carbon could be sequestered. And they also looked at scenarios and found out that half to more than 1 ton of carbon per hectare can be sequestered, and upscaling these numbers on the 1,600 million cropland worldwide up to 1,840 million tons of carbon could be actually sequestered. And so employing carbon smart farming to worldwide croplands could hence compensate for up to almost 13% in a high sequestration scenario to current greenhouse gas emissions of 54% of CO2 or 16.4 billion tons of carbon per year. But we have to look at the potentials also from the point of view that current changes of climate may already contribute to a lower it shows that in Germany, for example, we still have a loss of 0.2 tons of carbon per hectare per year. That means a net loss of carbon dioxide into the air. And so it has to be understood that we cannot talk only about increases in sequestration. We also have to look at schemes that preserve basically or keep the standard of carbon currently in the soil, that these measures taken in order to keep standards at levels are also rewarded by systems. In order to do that, there must be strict rules, of course. You know, the quantities accredited must be real. They must be measurable. They must be permanent. Savings in carbon must be additional. They should not come with the practice as usual. And they have to be independently verified, and they have to be unique. And for this purpose, you may understand there are a number of tedious works to do. It's quite labor intensive, the quantifications, the correctness of the numbers, the verification process, costly, labor intensive process. So we, in conjunction with partners from the RootCamp, are now looking into technologies and methods that ease basically the labor, the analytical demand, in order to make it feasible that basically the credits that are given as a reward to farmers are not eaten up by the analytical requirement and by the sampling requirement. So we basically started a project with a title Remote Estimation of Soil Organic Carbon that should in the end give a good method to quickly and accurately assess changes for methods and measures that farmers are taken in order to farm basically the carbon in their soils. And the role of a company like K+S could be to get closer to farmers, to be involved in that business, and to look into corporations with service partners that have the technology and have the tools in order to assist the verifying body or the farmers in the quantification. And so in a central part, K+S could be the conveyor of such a system and could develop basically a business model on carbon farming.
So we need to decide to move on, and I'm very happy to hand over to Michal, providing us more or less the macro perspective of what is possible, actually, what you can do in carbon farming. So please take over.
Thank you very much, Philip, for this kind introduction and the opportunity to share my point of view during this series of webinar. During my presentation, I won't like to convince the skeptics or struggle with the climatic dogma or talk the big politics. Today, I would like to take advantage of this limited time here and try to outline some general concept of carbon farming, trying to share with you a peak of relevance science evidence behind the simple agricultural practice that could be used for a better carbon storage and a good effect and resilience for climate change. Okay, so starting to show you the big picture, I would like to focus just a minute on the emission associated with the carbon distribution worldwide. So we have the specific patterns of carbon emitted that is kind of specific for industrialized and developing countries. So the first strategy we could do to reduce the carbon footprint is, of course, trying to cut down parts of the source emission. That is possible to a certain extent by different measures. But when we see the pictures, 1/3 of the global carbon source is connected with farming, with food production. So although we could reduce our food uses or change our customer preferences or try to adjust the farming practice to meet the challenges. So on this elegant diagram, I would like to show you the major flows of carbon stocks in the ecosphere. So first of all, we have sources of carbon, so mainly the fossil fuels that are above ground, our feeds. Then we've got the emitters sources. So we have the energy plants, we have the industries, all kinds of transportation, and also agri-sectors that also put part of the carbon on that way. Then we have the sinks of carbon when we could allocate it. So we have the land-based sinks and ocean-based sinks, and in the middle we have the circulation of the carbon fluxes that is highly connected with the human activities. So the major problem of carbon footprints gave the policymakers and scientists sleepless nights, but resulted in developing certain strategies to solve the problem. So first of all, we could use the basic biology and use the reforestation to allocate carbon within the builded wood biomass that would limit its amount in air, and for a certain period of time have it blocked in the timber. But of course, the availability of ecosystems for forest planting is of course limited. Then we have all the bioenergy sector. So we could use the plant biomass to burn it down or ferment it properly to produce the energy or fuel. So that's mean revenue for us. And then during this process, pump the CO2 to the ground to lock it. But it will also require land and food crops for planted for the bioenergy processes. Then we have the promising biochar production system. So we could produce the charcoal from biomass by its pyrolysis without the oxygen source. So, and then use it as the soil amelioration, so increase the fertility. But of course, it also has some cons connected to the resources and energy intensivity of these processes. Then we have the next strategy of using some geoenergying services to pulverize the rock and use the rock powder to allocate it on soil and have the carbons binded to different minerals like carbonates and limit its availability in air. But it of course needs some large infrastructure and portion of land to store it. Then of course we have the direct, it seems the easiest solution to directly capture the air, the CO2 from air, but it needs enormous amount of energy and significant amount of money to do so. So it offers us the permanent storage, but using the small amount of land and water resources. But as far as the technology is developing, it costs us a giant amount of money. Then we have the ocean fertilization strategy. So it is based on using some iron fillings that are sprinkled at the sea to help plankton growth and use the CO2 for its metabolism. And then just with the necromass, go down deep the sea and allocate there. But of course, it influenced the biosphere of the oceans and could cause the acidification of the bottom parts of the ocean. And last but not least, we have the soil carbon sequestration. So use the natural processes to adjust our agriculture practice and also have some environmental benefits like positively influencing soil structure and biodiversity. Of course, with the resilience for the climate change. So summing this all this information up, it emerged that we could pin up some interesting strategies that could be used. On this diagram, I try to show you the comparative of different strategies, taking two variables. On the y-axis, we have the cost per 1 metric ton captured carbon. And on the x-axis, we have the amount of gigatons of removed CO2 from the atmosphere. So it emerged that the reforestation, afforestation, reforestation, and different adjusted forestry practices could be an efficient way to positively reduce the carbon footprint. Also the biochar production sounds effective, and one of the most promising approaches is the soil sequestration using our natural methods. So it seems that nature has already developed the technology that could sufficiently capture CO2, and it is called photosynthesis, of course. But shall we consider as this method as suitable and sufficient to sink all the carbon that is in excess in the atmosphere? Let's see at the numbers. When we see the estimation of the annual emission of CO2 globally and compare it with the largest repository of organic matter on land, that is soil-borne, we can see that it is 4 times as much as whole vegetation on the planet and could be easily used as a sink to use that excessive carbon. So the biological process that underlie behind is quite simple. So we have the 2 core players here. So there are plants that actually capture via photosynthesis the huge amount of carbon that is estimated as 120 gigatons per year, but half of this is lost by the respiration. And then we have the second player, that is the soil microbials below the ground, that are involved in the decomposition of the organic matter and lock it down in the soil. So when we adjust carefully the agriculture practice we use, for example, we use the cover cropping to protect the healthy condition of soil, and the microbials that are already there produce their metabolites, and during their when they decompose and form the necromass is also binded to clay particles and different soluble minerals from the soil to form mineral-associated organic matter. That is the guarantee of the long-term storage inside the soil sink. So to share some general facts, what agricultural practice could be used, that won't be anything new because it is known since centuries to the agriculture. We could use the cover crops, we could use the mulching strategy just to keep the soil healthy and in good condition, both for plants and for microbials inside. Then we could use the rotation of multi-species cover crops using legumes and other crops. Then we are limiting the need of the use of pesticides. We could also try to reduce the soil disturbance. So by reducing the tillage, by maintaining the right soil structure to benefit all the conditions of soil. Then, of course, rational grazing. When we try to put together the animal production system and plant production system, and also we get the livestock manure that could be used, as well as compost for benefiting the nutritional value of soils and fertilizing it in natural way. That all of these matters are connected to the regenerative agriculture strategy that is used, the set of practices that could be used for increase the biodiversity, building the rich and healthy soil and improve the stability of all the ecosystems. To share some scientific evidence that underlie this recommendation, I'd like to present this meta-analysis. On the charts, you can see that the intensity of the colors reflect the representation of the number of studies that confirm the results of mitigation climate changes and allocating CO2 by different measures. So we have different kind of forestry systems like reforestation, natural forest management, or even the urban reforestation, and activities that are connected to the agricultural practice. So using the mentioned cover crops, the biochar production processes, also the alley cropping to influence the beneficial systems of the ecosphere, or different ways of cropland nutrient management to give the possibility to bind this CO2. But will all this practice be permanent for long term? The answer is yes. The American Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania may give a relevant answer by their 40 years of expertise in regenerative farming by side-by-side comparison. So first of all, in the environmental part, we can see that it is good for both for environment and soil conditions, having more than 30% growth when using no-tillage techniques. When we do not disturb soil, we also increase the soil health that is measured by the higher soil organic matter by 25%. And of course, there is a question if it will bring profits. And of course, it will do. We can see that using the no-tillage technique in corn, we could go up to 4 times greater profits in no-tilling systems. And even in the drought conditions, we could sustain 40% higher yields compared to the traditional cultivation. So in conclusion, I would like to leave you with that question, if there's just simple processes could lead us to effective reduction of carbon footprint. So according to the estimation, there's 6 methods presented here could just render the agriculture carbon negative scenarios in coming years. But could we even speed it up a little bit? Of course we could. We could use the advantage of novel research and developments in the scientific field. So we could use the soil carbon mapping, we could use the phenotyping and field monitoring techniques and plant breeding techniques and microbial biotechnology to try to speed it, the carbon, to reduce the carbon footprint even more. Of course, the use of vertical farming approaches seem very promising to reduce the carbon footprint, and all of these could lead to us to a better solution for this problem. So I would like to, I would be ready to answer all your additional questions during the discussion via the DLG platform or directly via my social media channels. So thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, I need to unmute. Many thanks, Michal. So that actually leads me direct to the next participants, and we will have time for some discussions later. So measuring soil organic carbon, Suvrajit, I guess it's on you now.
Okay, so thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, so my name is Suvrajit Saha. I'm one of the 2 co-founders at SmartCloudFarming. And what we do at SmartCloudFarming is we use remote sensing to carry out advanced soil analytics and assess different soil parameters for large areas of land in this manner. And the reason why we do this is because we want to provide trust and transparency to carbon farming. So in the previous presentation, you saw like what's the potential of carbon farming and what's the potential of storing carbon, or even the benefits of storing carbon in soils, and how it helps not just the atmosphere, but how soil quality and even yields can be improved over time. But there is one big problem. If you want to store large amounts of carbon, let's say if you want to store carbon in soils, and one of the essential parameters that you want to know is how much of soil carbon am I storing over soil? So how is the change looking over time? And that is essential because you need to know whether your farming practices are yielding the right results or the desired results, or you need to change something. And this is where exactly the problem lies. So it's pretty difficult to measure soil carbon if you're carrying out carbon farming for large areas of land, primarily because the way soil carbon is measured today is extremely physical. So as you see on the screen, you either go out onto the field and you collect soil samples, most of the times up to a depth of 30 centimeters, in some cases even deeper. And this is very laborious. This is a very tedious, time-consuming process. And above all, if you're doing it in Europe, for example, it's also very costly. The other instances, if you're into agroforestry and you're storing carbon in trees, for example, the usual way is to go out onto the field and for maybe every 10, 20, 30 hectares, you select 1 or 2 trees and you measure the circumference, and you decide, you calculate how much of carbon has been stored, and you average that for the entire area. Now, even in this case, even though it is not as, let's say, tedious as collecting soil samples, it is still extremely inaccurate, and it doesn't really provide you with much useful information or even kind of a satisfaction that, you know, I have some concrete proof. And this is why we say measuring soil carbon when it comes to large-scale carbon farming is a challenge of continental dimensions, because we are talking about huge tracts of land and these need to be assessed properly. And this is exactly what we are doing at SmartCloudFarming. We are building a AI-driven dashboard for remote carbon farming. And one of the very simple but very useful things that this would be doing is telling the users, for example, farmers or growers, whether their fields are sequestering carbon or they're emitting carbon. And based on that, further recommendations would be provided as to how to treat the field, how to carry out their right farming practices, and they can then, access and analyze different kinds of data. So the way we do this is a very simple diagram of how we do this, depiction of how we do this. So we take satellite data from Sentinel satellites and also from Landsat 8 satellites. We again take soil data, so soil data containing soil carbon and other parameters up to depths of 30 centimeters. And in some instances, we even take local weather data. And this is then fed into our neural network, which we call Soil AI. And this then assesses the field that we have taken or considered, and it creates a soil carbon map. So what happens in a neural network is basically a kind of it is not really a training, so the training is done beforehand, but once we have trained our neural network adequately, you have a calibration or a small calibration or a justification for that specific field, and after that it assesses the soil carbon and it creates a soil carbon map that tells you how soil carbon looks 30 centimeters below the surface. To see how it is done today, as of now, so you have two dominant methods. So one is a sampling-based method where you go out onto the field, take a few samples for every 3, 5, or 10 hectares, and you create a profile based on that. And this is not done every year. Most of the time it's done every 3 or 4 years and is therefore not very reliable. Then you have a model-based where you have a mathematical model of a certain kind of soil. You feed that in with data and you get an output. And this is basically the reason why we decided that we need something else, because these are not really very, I would say, reliable or even satisfactory in terms of output or in terms of effort. And we decided we want to do it evidence-based. And evidence-based basically means that we are considering not just a few points every 5 or 10 hectares. We are considering more than 8 or 10 points per hectare, and we are doing it for the entire field. So if you have 10 hectares of land that you want to assess, we shall be assessing the entire 10 hectares and not just 5 or 6 hectares and then averaging it for the rest of the field. And this is possible because we're using something like remote sensing and combining that with artificial intelligence driven algorithms and therefore the scalability. And this is seeing a lot of activity. And besides us, in the next years, we expect even young startups, primarily from North America, to enter the space. So some of them are like Latameramics from the US, or Terramera from Canada, or even Boomitra that recently got funded by, I think, Yara in the US again. We also have indigo carbon. So right now I've put it under sampling based because based on our knowledge, they are doing a lot of sampling, but we think even indigo is going to shift over to the evidence-based process in the next few years. And what this offers, this evidence-based process, is nothing but a very sound proof of impact, which means you know exactly how your farming practice has affected the carbon storage on your land, in your soil. And this is very important, and we go so far to say that this is going to be the most important KPI in the next 10 years when it comes to agriculture or regenerative farming, and it's going to overshadow every other KPI because this is something, this is so vital and not available today. Yes, so that's in short what we do. Our goal is basically to map the world's soils in 3D using remote sensing, and we're very happy to discuss this further with you. Thanks a lot.
So many thanks, Suvrajit. So as I said, discussion, we want to have it at the end. So we had been at the breakfast. What is now biochar actually for the soil? Michael, can you take over and tell us actually what the contribution of biochar will be and what your hidden secret is to make biochar available? Suvrajit, can you please stop sharing your screen? Many thanks. And now Michael is on air.
Okay. Yeah, imagine a world made of CO2, where houses and streets store CO2, and plastic on the field and in the forest become fertilizer, where residual biomass is a valuable raw material other than wood fuel. I'm Michael Zernatinger from Carbonauten, the minus CO2 factory. We are a startup from southern Germany, and we plan to create exactly this world, generating new valuable value streams for forests and farmers. In an ideal world, when trees are felled and much of the wood resource as possible is destined to long-life timber products, ensuring that the atmospheric carbon sequestered by the trees remains stored in timber in the long term. In a less than ideal world, however, part of the carbon sequestered by trees is lost after felling, when firewood is burned or when waste biomass rots and releases its embedded carbon and other greenhouse gases. What if there was a way to turn residual biomass of all kinds, included mixed with other materials, into long-life products and keep wood carbon locked up for longer? For the agro and forestry industry, this would mean creating an alternative to traditional markets by tapping into the bioeconomy. Carbonauten developed a system where pyrolytic carbonization of residual biomass produces solid biocarbons, renewable energy, and the pyrolysis oil, beside the climate service of prolonging carbon storage in the form of biocarbons. Pyrolytic carbonization is a pyrolytic process where biomass gets turned into biocarbon through gasification. Pyrolysis is the thermal decomposition of materials and elevated temperatures in an inert atmosphere. It involves a change of chemical compositions. Residual biomass that have the potential value as feedstock for the bioeconomy, meaning it can be turned into new product through processes such as carbonization. It is important to highlight once more that residual biomass refers to biomass that is an underutilized byproduct of industrials such as wood processing, forestry, or farming, and would otherwise be discarded or waste. In forestry and timber processing, examples of residual biomasses are beetle or otherwise diseased wood, green cuttings, brush and branches left on harvesting sites, solvent byproducts, waste wood, and biomass contaminated with plastics, such as roadside green cuttings, but also residuals from the agricultural sector, like shells or short rotation plantations. Currently, some of these products will go into traditional biomass or wood fuel markets, but the bioeconomy has the potential to offer a different market route for residual biomasses. with the added value of carbon and biomass being retained in solid products, and additional opportunity to turn waste material into a new raw material. Woody biomass consists of a lot of different valuable fractions. In particular, 3 fractions can be removed from the biomass by pyrolysis in only 1 process step. 3 products derive from 1 process. So the first is the pyrolysis gas. It's used to generate renewable energy, which could be used for both thermal use and electricity, ideally on-site. The second one is the pyrolysis oil. It's a dark brown liquid made from a multitude of chemical components as raw material for the bioeconomy. In addition to being used as a biofuel or heating component, pyrolysis oil can be used as a raw material source for chemical applications. But it can also be used as wood vinegar. And wood vinegar is the historic pesticide and fungicide that had been forgotten. It is one of these advantages, especially regarding to the loss of biodiversity, because it does not kill insects, but primarily drives away harmful insects, and the beneficial insects are preserved. This means that more flowers are pollinated and the output increases. In addition, there is no need for artificial pollination. And in a test in Ghana, our partner was able to increase the yield of cocoa plants by 100% compared to synthetic fertilizers, while at the same time reducing human labor. Currently, we are doing trials in Italy with olive groves and the wood vinegar. The solid biocarbons that has already been presented, and here I want to add something because Michal, he said that biocarbons have the price of around up to 100 euros. In our model, this is such an efficient model that we even don't need any compensation for the CO2 sequestration, because we can use the biocarbons to make new valuable products out of it, and therefore don't need any compensation for the CO2. But I want to go more into detail. So the solid biocarbons, which can be processed into innovative net materials or more traditionally into soil fertilizers. Biocarbons and their applications in agro and forestry are the focus of this presentation. So the biocarbons are bound carbon and thus, and as a solid material, offer a climate positive contribution to combating the climate crisis. Biocarbons can be used in various applications in the soil or in products for the plastic, construction, forestry, and agri sector. And thereby 1 ton of pure biocarbons can store the equivalent of up to 3.3 tons of CO2. If used in soil or animal feed, they can furthermore help to avoid other greenhouse gases like methane. One of the more traditional applications of biocarbons is their use in agriculture and forestry as a water buffer and a nutrition store. The so-called terra preta is a mixture of carbon, minerals, and compost, and indigenous technique developed in the Amazon area in South America to help the normally nutrition poor tropical soil to achieve maximum soil fertility. Terra preta is a man-made superfertilizer produced without any synthetic substances. The biocarbons act like a sponge for microorganisms and help to build up humus and the associated soil fertility. In addition, the increased humidity prevents the emission of greenhouse gases from the soil. The carbons can also be absorbed into the soil substrate and promote the growth and stability of trees in nurseries. Meta-studies found from around 10,000 individual studies an average yield growth of 10% compared to synthetic fertilizers. And these effects are significantly higher in the tropics. In addition, 60% more carbon is stored in the soil, and tree growth is increased by 40%. The leaching of nitrate is 60% lower, and the water holding capacity increased by an average of 20%. Also, the biocarbons increase the pH value, and so the fertility of the soil and the microorganism can increase. For this application, only pure residual biomass, so free of any contaminations with plastics and so on, can be used as a feedstock. Beside the soil application, innovative net materials developed by us are biocarbons in combination with various binders. So binders can be biopolymers, fossil polymers, silicates, minerals, and even protein. So besides this, we can substitute a wide range of fossil materials. And when we add it in plastic products, it can improve their quality by making them more UV resistant, more robust, and lighter. And the best of all, the biocarbons are even cheaper than existing fossil binders. So the dilemma of profitability and sustainability is solved in one product. And also it's a very disruptive idea, because the more we produce of the biocarbon, the better it is for the climate and for the environment. An interesting example of the use of net materials made from biocarbon are biodegradable plastic products, which have relevant applications in the forestry and agricultural sector. So the dissolving plant pots, like you can see here on the presentation, behave like plastic pots, but they break down after a definable period of time. This can be set for a few days to several years, depending on the application. And these avoid plastic waste on the field and also in the forests. In addition, the carbons end up in the soil, and this acts like the natural soil substrate. So they even become a fertilizer to the soil. And this can for sure not only be for this plant pot, it can also be, for example, for tree shelters, bite protection, or agricultural film.
So, Michael, I guess we need to come to an end.
Okay, yeah. So, yes.
To still have time for the discussion, since we run a very little late. So many thanks for the presentation. One thing to note is that you want to bring biochar production to a new scale with a couple thousand tons facility that should be open end of year and beginning of next year in Eberswalde, so that you are really honored to produce it on a different scale. I would like to now go into the discussion. We are running towards the end of this webinar, but I will take a couple of minutes to still address a couple of questions. So, Michal, it became pretty clear that agroforest might be a good solution for carbon sequestration. But how is it actually evolved? How do we actually address that to the individual farmer? Is it just already a common knowledge? Is there any proof needed still? Or would you say it's just needed to have new ways of education to enable the realization of the methods that drive towards a carbon negative agriculture?
Okay, thank you. I think I would address this question first. It should require the kind of reformation of the timber market, just to have the additional force of single farmers or forestry workers have their product that could need to involve certain money input to start farming of different species, to have it as the same as the fair good systems, to have it what is the carbon credit of the produced wood, probably it would be, but all the ways of coupling tree growing with agriculture are a good way. For example, use trees as windbreakers is a good way for both that benefits the quality and crop performance on field, and also give the reservoir for biodiversity and a source of timber and additional revenue for farmers. And then I think that it should be concerned as a global strategy, how to promote the initiatives, although on the policymaker level, just to reach the every small participant of this forestry sector. Oh, you have switch off voice.
Sorry, no, it was on me. Suvrajit. So actually, it's good to do good and to talk about it. You mentioned the proof of impact. So is it okay for the farmer just to activate different measures, change things, or what is your contribution actually proving what has happened?
I think that all the carbon storing indices could be good for the market, because the consumer by their preferences would be prone to choose the products if he would like to focus only on the soil quality of timber, or he would like to get the sustainability of the production in as also his preference in this regard.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And Suvrajit, so what would your contribution be that? So we understood that it's a interaction of different measures, different effects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So as I said, it is definitely not sufficient to implement certain measures, because when you implement any kind of measure, you want to know what effect that measure is having, because at the end of the day, you implemented a measure because you wanted to achieve something. And this is exactly what we mean by proof of impact, because we will be able to show what it is that you have achieved through that measure that you have implemented. And because there is no, let's say, reliable or adequate way to find out what this outcome is today, it is therefore something that the farmers are actually very happy about. So we've already spoken to a lot of farmers in Germany, in Italy, in the US, and we were pleasantly surprised that they were already looking for something like this, and they are very open to this. So it's I think a problem that is very well kind of rooted, or very well known to the farming community, and because there is too little interaction between the farming community and, let's say, the rest of the businesses or whatever, these do not really get communicated. So yeah, we have been able to ascertain that this proof of impact, or this proof that you're having the desired output or the desired results, that is very much important for the key stakeholders, and it is not possible today with any other kind of solution.
Very interesting. And again, we've also experienced many different and contributing effects by the application of biochar within carbon farming. Michal, so what actually is the tipping point? So we have heard that it's always a combination of costs and effect of these different measures. So in terms of biochar, Are there possibilities in having it in a decentral way, small facilities, or why did you choose to actually address a certain scale, a certain level of scaling in then producing the biochar? What is the reason behind that?
Yeah, so for us, it's important to have many facilities, many decentralized facilities, because every facility means stored carbon. And I also think that the solutions that also Suvrajit and Michal offered are very important. So we should work together, and we should think more as a whole and as a holistic solution, not in only one. We are doing biochar, they are doing other things. We have to work together to make a successful solution to the farmers, and then also that the farmers get paid for that, and have the proof of the impact, as Suvrajit said, that is done by their work, and then get it compensated by the public or by whoever. But I think the traditional way of doing only one thing and don't check what the others are doing is it's old-fashioned, and all the problem solvers have to work together. For us, we think it's very important to have these decentralized locations, because we want to be close to the biomass. And also we want to be in different areas of the world. So we think globally. I also mentioned that the effect of the biocarbons in the tropics is much higher. So we address a lot of people and companies in the tropics. Our first facility will start producing by the end of this year, and it's in Berlin or close to Berlin. And the second and third, they will already be in the tropics. So in Panama and the Colombia, because there we have even bigger impacts than we can have here in Germany. But for us, it's also important that we do not only focus on the agricultural sector, we also want to focus on other sectors, because, as I said, the more we produce, the better it is for the climate. And so we should also focus on other sectors, so that we can produce or use all the biomass that is available in the world and transforming it to net materials, for not only for the agricultural sector, but also for other sectors, to have a bigger impact.
We have now one question actually in the chat. I can just read it. So, can horticulture be considered as part of plant biomass sequestration within the stems, branches, and roots? Michal, is it something for you that you want to take the question? So what's the impact of horticulture within carbon farming?
I think indeed, yes, it would be most, of course, it depends what type of horticulture and what techniques of cultivation does it involve. But part of the techniques could be not unique for just the field grown crops, but for the horticulture as well. And it, as Michael previously said, it should compose different measures that we should take. We should consider it holistically, as part of this could be the leftovers could be used as input materials for some biochar production. We could also influence the quality of the health root systems to sustain the microbials, but as mentioned earlier, it really depends what type of technique we use. For example, the dispersed horticulture produces, as well as some vertical farming installations, could be a good way to limit the carbon emission at source, because then we will have the limited amount of carbon emitted to the environment. Probably Michael will tell more what would be the potential use of the leftover of this part of this sector of horticulture to the biochar production, if you have considered it as your input source, or it is limited.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are very flexible in the input source. So different kinds of input sources from the agriculture, but also from the forestry sector, and also like the fast rotating plantations. I think it's also very interesting for carbon farming, and we can harvest it and can use it for biochar.
For SmartCloudFarming, I know that you are able to provide the service also in Canada. How about you, Michal? Are you planning to go abroad?
Yeah, absolutely. That's that's very important to us. So biomass availability on the international scale is much bigger. And as I said, our second factory will be in Colombia. Our third factory will be in Panama. And I have a lot of talks in Southeast Asia, in Colombia, in Indonesia, in Malaysia. So international scale is very important to us. And also, again, the more we produce, the better it is for the climate. And so we need to address all the biomass sources that are available.
Perfect. So we are a little bit.
So not only the tropics, but also Canada is a big target market for us.
Obviously. Last question to Suvrajit. Does it make any difference if that's an agroforest or instead of just a plain crop field for you to measure it, or is it still possible to get a low error bar and precise results?
Well, for us, it would require, let's say, a certain amount of adaptation, I would say. So we can already do fields that are covered with crops and also covered with forests. But then we are looking, let's say we're calculating just for the soil, but then if you're having trees, then the tree should also be considered in. And that is, let's say, a next step in our development process that we also model in the trees and consider their input to the whole picture.
Very well. So many thanks. Many thanks for contributing. Many thanks for having us. That goes to Chantal. I guess you closed down now the live.